Welcome to Hardscript.
She said it at the kitchen island while scrolling through her phone, like she was commenting on the weather. She didn't look up. Her voice was calm, almost considerate. She said she wasn't sure she was in love with me anymore, but she liked having me around. The way someone might talk about a couch that still matched the room. I was standing there with my laptop bag still on my shoulder, shoes not even off. The house smelled like the citrus cleaner she liked, the one I kept restocking without being asked. I didn't interrupt her. I didn't ask questions. I set my bag down carefully, the way I did everything, and nodded once. I thanked her for being clear. That part surprised her enough to finally make her look up. She smiled, relieved. The conversation, in her mind, was done. Later that evening, she left for the gym. She always said it helped her reset after work. I watched her tie her hair in the hallway mirror, adjusting her leggings, checking angles. Her phone buzzed. She didn't hide it. She never thought she had to. She walked out light, energized, already somewhere else. I stayed. I cleared the dinner plates she hadn't touched. I wiped the counter. I set the alarm before bed like I always did. In the morning, I didn't remind her about the meeting she'd been anxious about. I didn't prep her coffee the way she liked it, oat milk warm just enough. I made mine and drank it standing up. At work, nothing changed. Schedules still ran. Problems still disappeared quietly. I signed off on adjustments, answered emails, kept the floor steady. When I got home, the house functioned. Lights worked. Bills were paid. The rhythm stayed intact. She noticed small things first. No text asking if she got home safe. No offer to handle the weekend plans. When she talked about her day, I listened politely, without stepping in to fix or reassure. I didn't argue. I didn't withdraw physically. I was still there. That night, her phone buzzed again while she was in the shower. A name flashed I hadn't seen before. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to. She came out smiling, relaxed, and sat next to me on the couch. She leaned in out of habit. I shifted just enough to stand. She watched me walk down the hallway, confusion replacing comfort. Behind me, the house stayed quiet. Everything was still working, just without me in it the way she remembered. The first person to notice wasn't her. It was Mark from operations, the kind of guy who only spoke when something was actually wrong. He asked if everything was fine at home because I'd stopped answering after-hours messages with my usual speed. I told him everything was covered, and it was. I just wasn't carrying anything extra anymore. At home, she started filling the silence with motion. More gym visits, louder playlists, longer showers. She talked more, not to me, but around me, narrating her day as if volume could replace connection. I stayed polite, present, neutral. I didn't interrupt. I didn't lean in. One evening, she mentioned her trainer in passing. His name slipped out too easily, paired with a laugh that didn't belong in our living room. She said he was motivating, attentive, always noticed her progress. She said it like she was reporting a benefit, not crossing a line. I nodded, the same way I did when vendors pitched ideas that didn't concern me. Later, her phone lit up on the counter while she was in the other room. It wasn't hidden. It never was. A message preview flashed, casual and familiar, the kind that assumes permission. I didn't touch it. I didn't need proof yet. The tone told me enough. She started asking small favors again. Could I look over something she was stressed about? Could I handle a call she didn't want to take? Could I reschedule something inconvenient? I said yes once, out of habit. Then I stopped. Not abruptly. Gradually. The way systems phase out obsolete processes. She adjusted by leaning harder into what was still feeding her. New gym clothes appeared. Her mood lifted on days she went and dropped sharply when she didn't. She came home flushed, energized, talking about how good it felt to be seen, to be pushed. She didn't notice that I stopped asking follow-up questions. The first crack showed when she realized the safety net wasn't responding. A bill reminder came and went. A minor issue at home stayed unresolved. Not because I couldn't fix it, but because no one asked me directly anymore. She hovered, uncertain, waiting for me to step in the way I always had. I didn't. She watched me carefully after that, like someone checking a familiar room and sensing that something had been removed without leaving a mark. I was still sleeping there, still sharing meals, still calm, but the warmth she relied on had gone quiet. She didn't understand it yet. She still thought this was a phase I'd talk through, something I'd adapt around like I always did. She had no idea that when she spoke her truth, I took it as instruction. And once a function is shut down properly, it doesn't restart on nostalgia. The proof didn't arrive like a confession. It showed up the way neglect always does, quietly, in patterns. Receipts appeared for protein shakes I'd never seen in our kitchen. Charges from a gym cafe she never used before. Small amounts, consistent, predictable. I noticed them the same way I noticed supply leaks at work, not with emotion, but with recognition. She stopped locking her phone, not because she felt honest, but because she felt safe. She assumed I wasn't looking anymore. She was right, in a way. I wasn't looking for reassurance. I was watching behavior. Her schedule shifted. She left earlier, came back later, always energized, never tired. She started wearing effort even on days she worked from home. The mirror time increased. The complaints about stress disappeared. She talked about her body differently, with pride that didn't include me. One afternoon, I came home while she was on a call in the other room. Her voice had a tone I hadn't heard directed at me in a long time. Lighter. Responsive. She laughed at nothing. When she noticed me, the tone flattened immediately. The call ended quickly. She explained without being asked. Over-explaining always came naturally to her. I didn't react. I set my bag down. I washed my hands. I asked if she needed the space. She said no, too quickly, and followed me around the kitchen like she was trying to reattach something that had slipped loose. Later that night, she fell asleep with her phone on her chest. A message preview lit the screen when it shifted. A familiar name again. A line about missing her energy. About how good she looked earlier. There was no urgency in it. No secrecy. Just entitlement. I turned the phone face down and got up. The next morning, I changed one thing. I rerouted my direct deposit. Not out of spite. Out of alignment. She hadn't noticed yet, but she would. Comfort runs on invisible systems until it doesn't. At work, I requested remote days without explanation. I stopped sharing my schedule. At home, I stopped initiating anything that resembled partnership. Meals happened when I made them for myself. Conversations ended when they no longer served a function. She tried to pull me back with familiarity. Old jokes, casual touches, references to shared memories. I accepted them politely and returned nothing extra. The realization didn't hit her all at once. It crept in slowly, like cold through a house where the heat had been turned off without warning. She sensed something failing but couldn't find the switch. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt in a way that demanded expression. I was simply done participating in a role she had already replaced. And while she was busy chasing affirmation from someone paid to notice her, she didn't see that the structure holding her life steady had already started to move without her. The shift became visible when I stopped buffering her life from friction. It wasn't dramatic. There were no slammed doors or raised voices. Things simply stopped smoothing themselves out. A delayed response here. An unanswered email there. The quiet gaps she never had to manage before started stacking up. She tested the boundaries cautiously at first. She asked if I could handle a call she didn't want to take, something tense with a client from her agency. I told her I was busy and left it at that. The look on her face lingered longer than the question. She wasn't upset yet. She was confused. I began taking short trips without announcement. Nothing suspicious. Just nights away, a hotel near the plant, dinners alone. I stopped sharing my location out of habit. When she texted, I replied when it was convenient, not immediate. Always polite. Always brief. She started checking the door when she heard a car outside. Not to greet me. To confirm. The house ran quieter. Groceries didn't replenish themselves. The printer stayed broken. A subscription she relied on expired and didn't magically renew. She handled it herself, irritated, mumbling about how things kept slipping lately. She said it like the house was malfunctioning, not realizing the operator had stepped back. At the same time, she leaned harder into the gym. I could feel it in the air when she came home. The confidence sharpened, then frayed. The highs were higher. The drops were steeper. She talked about being exhausted, about feeling stretched thin. She waited for me to anchor it, to translate chaos into order. I didn't. One evening, she tried to recreate closeness physically, sliding into my space with familiarity that assumed permission. I didn't reject her. I stood, said I had work to finish, and left the room. No argument. No explanation. That was the night she cried quietly in the shower, thinking the water would cover it. I heard it. I didn't intervene. The next day, she asked if something was wrong. She said it carefully, like someone testing ice. I told her nothing had changed. I reminded her of what she'd said at the island. I thanked her again for the clarity. She laughed it off, uneasy, and said she didn't mean it like that. She said people say things. She said I was being dramatic. I didn't respond, because this wasn't drama. It was execution. Clean, silent, precise. And while she was still measuring her worth in reflected attention from someone who needed her approval to survive, she didn't notice that the ground under her routine had already shifted. I wasn't disappearing from the house. I was disappearing from the function she depended on most. The first real consequence didn't come from me. It came from him. She came home one evening irritated in a way that didn't fit the house. Her energy was off, sharp around the edges. She moved through the rooms like she was looking for something to push against. She talked about the gym without enthusiasm this time, about how her trainer had been distracted, late, rushing between clients. She said it casually, but her eyes kept checking my face. I didn't give her one. Later, her phone buzzed again. This time she looked at it immediately, then frowned. She typed fast, paused, erased, typed again. When she put the phone down, she sighed like someone who'd just realized they weren't the only priority in the room. That night, she tried to pull me into a conversation about us. Not emotional, strategic. She framed it like concern, like teamwork. She said she felt distance and wanted to reconnect. She said we'd both been busy. She said maybe we needed a reset. I listened. I told her I thought things were functioning as discussed. I reminded her that she liked having me around, not necessarily involved. I said I was honoring that. She stared at me longer than usual, searching for the version of me that would soften the edges, translate her discomfort into reassurance. She didn't find him. A few days later, something shifted socially. Her sister stopped calling. A friend canceled plans without rescheduling. At a work dinner, she came home quiet, irritated at how little attention she'd received. She said people seemed distant lately, distracted, like no one was really listening. I nodded. I didn't fill the silence. The trainer's presence became less reliable. Sessions moved. Messages shortened. The attention that once felt abundant now felt conditional. She compensated by offering more of herself, more enthusiasm, more availability. I watched it happen from the edge of the room, the way you watch a process run past its efficiency point. She started hovering around me again, not for affection but for grounding. She asked my opinion more. She waited for reactions. She tested small boundaries, leaning into shared routines she'd abandoned. I stayed steady, neutral, unavailable without being absent. One evening, she asked if I still loved her. She asked it softly, like a safety check. I told her I was present. I told her I was respectful. I told her I wasn't confused. That answer unsettled her more than anger ever could. Because the comforts she'd outsourced were becoming unreliable, and the ones she'd taken for granted were no longer automatic. The equation she'd built her confidence on was breaking down. And for the first time, she realized that the man she thought would always be there, waiting, stabilizing, absorbing, had stopped absorbing altogether. The silence wasn't punishment. It was the result. The social shift hit her harder than anything I'd done at home. It showed up in fragments she didn't control. A pause when she entered a room. Conversations that didn't fully open. Invitations that stopped arriving without explanation. She blamed work stress at first, then timing, then jealousy. Anything but pattern. One evening, she came home tense and unusually quiet. She moved through the kitchen without turning on music, set her bag down harder than necessary. When she finally spoke, she mentioned a comment someone had made at a small gathering. Not an accusation, just a question framed as concern, asking if everything was okay with us. The kind of question that pretends not to know while knowing enough. She waited for me to react. I didn't. Her phone became less of a lifeline and more of a source of irritation. Notifications slowed. Responses came later. Sometimes not at all. The trainer's attention, once steady and affirming, now felt transactional. He still showed up, but the warmth was inconsistent, the interest diluted by whatever came next. She felt it, even if she didn't name it. At the same time, the house offered no relief. I didn't ask how her day went. I didn't volunteer solutions. When she talked, I listened without shaping the outcome. When she struggled, I didn't step in early to prevent the fall. I stayed calm, consistent, unmoved. She tried to regain footing by performing normalcy. She cooked once, elaborately, setting the table the way she used to. She waited for praise, for engagement, for something that would confirm the ground was still there. I thanked her and cleaned my plate when I was done. Later, she sat across from me and said people were acting strange lately. She said she felt exposed, like she'd missed a step and everyone noticed. She said she didn't know who was on her side anymore. I told her people respond to energy shifts. I told her stability doesn't announce when it leaves. It just stops compensating. That night, she scrolled through old photos, lingering on moments that once felt secure. I could see it reflected in the dark screen. She looked at me like I was part of the past she was trying to recover, not the present she was living. The next day, she asked if we could plan something together. A weekend, a reset, something public. I told her I didn't feel the need to perform reassurance. That was when the panic set in. Not loud, not dramatic, quiet and controlled, the way fear looks when it's trying not to be seen. Because the attention she'd built her confidence on was thinning everywhere at once. And the man she assumed would always counterbalance that loss had stopped doing so entirely. She was surrounded by people, and completely unsupported. The isolation didn't arrive all at once. It crept in through empty spaces she couldn't fill fast enough. Mornings became quieter. She lingered longer before leaving, hovering like she was waiting for something to pull her back into alignment. I kept my routine unchanged. Coffee, work, silence that didn't ask for permission. She started asking indirect questions. Whether I was tired, whether work was stressful, whether I needed anything. The concerns sounded borrowed, like a language she hadn't used in a while and wasn't fluent in anymore. I answered politely, briefly, nothing that opened a door. Her gym schedule became erratic. Some days she went twice. Other days she didn't go at all. When she skipped, her restlessness stayed in the house, pacing from room to room. She tried to talk more on those days, offering observations, small complaints, fragments of stories meant to spark engagement. I acknowledged them without investing. The trainer stopped coming up in conversation. Not because he disappeared, but because the role he played was no longer delivering what it used to. Attention without exclusivity loses its charge quickly. She felt that loss and had nowhere safe to place it. Friends checked in less. When they did, the conversations felt shallow, distracted. She complained once that people only wanted her when she was on, when she was fun, light, interesting. She said it like a realization, not a complaint. I listened without correcting her. One evening, she sat on the edge of the bed and watched me pack a small bag for another night away. She asked where I was going. I told her I had work in the morning and didn't want the commute. She nodded, then asked if I'd be back the next day. I said yes. She asked if we were okay. I said we were operating within the terms she'd defined. That answer landed differently this time. There was no relief in her expression, just the understanding that she couldn't negotiate a feeling she'd already dismissed. The house felt larger without me in it. I could tell when I returned. The air carried a tension that hadn't been there before, like something unresolved was waiting in every room. She followed me with her eyes, not out of suspicion, but out of need. She tried to sit close again, to mirror my schedule, to reinsert herself into my orbit quietly, hoping proximity would do the work she no longer knew how to do directly. I didn't stop her. I didn't reward it either. That was when she understood she wasn't being punished. She was being excluded, not from the house, not from the marriage on paper, but from the internal space where she used to matter by default. And once someone feels that kind of absence while you're standing right in front of them, panic doesn't look dramatic. It looks like restraint breaking under pressure. She chose the moment carefully, not after a fight, not after a silence. She waited for an evening that felt almost normal, when the house wasn't heavy, when I was sitting at the table reviewing notes, calm and unhurried. She sat across from me, hands folded, posture deliberate. This wasn't impulse. This was strategy. She said she felt like she was losing me. She said she didn't recognize the distance anymore. She said she wanted to understand what was happening before it went too far. Her voice stayed steady, but her eyes kept searching my face for something to grab onto. I didn't interrupt. I let her finish. When I responded, I kept my tone even. I reminded her of what she'd said weeks earlier, how she'd framed our marriage as convenience. I told her I'd taken that seriously. I told her I'd adjusted accordingly. No accusation, no edge, just alignment. She shook her head and said that wasn't what she meant. She said people say things when they're overwhelmed. She said she never expected me to step back like this. She said she thought I understood her better than that. I told her understanding doesn't require self-erasure. That was when the control cracked. Her composure slipped, just slightly. She leaned forward, speaking faster now, explaining herself, revising history in real time. She talked about feeling unseen, about needing validation, about how harmless it all was. She framed it as confusion, not choice. I didn't ask about the trainer. I didn't need to. The absence of denial said enough. She asked if I was planning to leave. She asked if this was punishment. She asked if I still wanted to be married. I told her I was still here. I told her I wasn't angry. I told her I wasn't confused. I told her I had stopped acting like a husband the moment she told me she no longer wanted one in the way that mattered. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was heavy and final. She sat back slowly, like someone realizing the ground they were standing on had shifted without warning. She said she wanted to fix this. She said she was willing to do the work. She said she didn't mean to hurt me. I told her intent doesn't reverse impact. That was the moment she understood the imbalance. Not because I raised my voice or threatened to leave, but because I didn't need anything from her to remain steady. She had come looking for reassurance. What she found was distance that couldn't be negotiated. And for the first time since this started, she wasn't talking to manage me. She was talking to stop herself from falling. Her collapse didn't look like a breakdown. It looked like exhaustion finally catching up to performance. The energy she used to manage everyone's perception ran out quietly, leaving her exposed in ways she couldn't curate. It started at work. She came home subdued, movement slower, voice flatter. She mentioned tension with her team, how a few people seemed distant, less responsive to her usual warmth. She said someone questioned her focus in a meeting. Not aggressively, just enough to make it sting. She laughed it off when she told me, but the laugh didn't land. The gym stopped being a refuge. She still went, but the returns diminished. The trainer canceled once without explanation. Another time, he rushed through a session, already glancing at his phone. The attention that once felt exclusive now felt borrowed. She noticed. She just didn't know where to put the disappointment. She stopped dressing for effect at home. Not because she didn't care, but because there was no audience left that mirrored her back to herself. She drifted through the house, touching things she used to take for granted, like she was checking whether they were still real. Friends stopped calling altogether. When she reached out, responses came late, polite, thin. She scrolled through social feeds at night, watching other people's lives continue without her. She wasn't excluded loudly. She was forgotten. And I stayed exactly the same. I didn't escalate. I didn't retreat further. I remained calm, consistent, present without offering relief. I answered questions directly. I didn't soothe. I didn't rescue. One evening, she sat alone at the table long after dinner, staring at nothing. I could see memories surfacing in her expression, moments she'd dismissed when they were happening. Times I'd stepped in without being asked. Decisions I'd carried quietly. Stability she'd assumed was permanent because it never demanded recognition. Those memories didn't come with comfort. They came with weight. She finally said my name like she needed permission to say it. When I looked at her, she didn't launch into explanation or defense. She just looked tired. Smaller. Not broken, but stripped of the layers that kept her afloat. She said she hadn't realized how much of her life had been running on me being steady in the background. She said she thought she had more time to figure things out. She said she didn't know how everything slipped so fast. I listened. Outside, nothing dramatic happened. No doors slammed. No voices raised. The world didn't react to her realization at all. That was the hardest part. Because the consequences weren't loud. They were cumulative. And by the time she understood what she'd lost access to, it wasn't something I could simply turn back on without erasing myself. She wasn't facing my anger. She was facing the absence of my protection. And there was no one left to absorb that for her. The end didn't announce itself. It arrived quietly, the way real conclusions do, without ceremony or witnesses. She stood in the doorway of the living room one evening, watching me gather a few documents into a folder. Not packing, not leaving, just organizing. The same way I handled everything once it stopped being emotional. She asked if this was it. Not with accusation, with fear. I told her nothing had changed since the moment. She said she wasn't sure she loved me anymore, but liked having me around. I told her I believed her. I told her I'd stopped pretending otherwise. My voice didn't rise. It didn't soften either. She stepped closer, careful, like sudden movement might break what little connection was left. She said she understood now. She said she hadn't realized what words could do once they were spoken. She said she thought love was flexible, that comfort would wait until she was ready to choose it again. I looked at her and saw someone finally present. Not performing, not managing, just standing there with no leverage left. She asked if we could start over. I told her starting over requires two people who didn't replace each other while standing in the same room. I told her I hadn't disappeared. I told her I'd simply stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. That was the moment she broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. Her shoulders dropped. Her face gave up control. She understood there would be no instant repair, no emotional override, no return to the version of me that absorbed everything and asked for nothing. She said she would do anything. I told her anything that came from fear wasn't enough. I stayed. I didn't walk out. I didn't punish her with absence. I kept my routines, my boundaries, my distance. The house remained intact, but the rules had changed permanently. She could feel it in every interaction after that, in the way I listened without chasing, in the way I responded without adjusting myself, in the way my presence no longer bent around her needs. There was no revenge in it, no victory speech, just clarity. She learned that comfort isn't a right. It's a privilege maintained by care. And once it's treated as disposable, it doesn't come back on demand. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg. I didn't disappear. I became unreachable in the only place that ever mattered. And that was the price of the truth she chose to say out loud, believing it would never cost her anything permanent. Real men don't explode. They exit. Subscribe for more power stories.